Good morning, and let me share with you something interesting. Genesis, well, actually, let's do Hebrews 11:21. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both his sons Joseph and worshipped upon the top of his staff. This was in Hebrews, written by the Apostle Paul. Now, he's referring to an event here in Genesis 47:31. And he said, swear unto me, and he swore unto him, and Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head. Well, which was it, the top of his staff or the head of his bed? You know, I'm still debating whether to send my manuscript I have to my publisher or not, where I make a bold prediction from Scripture. I'm not a prophet, I'm not a watchman, I'm a scribe. I'm one who studies the Scripture in original languages. And from that, however, and I see the parallels. I see, history as it repeats itself. And so based solely on that, history repeating itself, I look at what's happening in the United States and I make a very bold prediction as what's going to happen for the rest of this year and into next year, into 2022. Not prophetic, just simply saying, this is the pattern that seems to follow and the results of that pattern. And so I just take it beyond that, but then I'm just afraid that people are going to confuse me with a prophet or something, and I don't want that to happen because that's not my calling. And I could be wrong, I'm not a prophet, I'm just making an evaluation based on Scripture, and I could be wrong in my analysis. So it's kind of a different genre that I'm approaching in that book, and I don't know if I'm going to have my publisher publish it or not. But this would be one of the chapters in the book, because what's happening here? What does it mean to worship on top of the staff, or is he worshiping at the head of his bed? Actually, there was no head of the bed in those days. They didn't have bed frames. A bed frame will distinguish which is the front of the bed or the head of the bed, and which is the end of the bed. All they had was, and they didn't have, mattresses that, are held up by legs. All they had was just a little mat that laid on the floor. And the head of the bed was where you put your head. There was no distinction. So I kind of doubt that's really the proper translation for this. Because you see, in the Masoretic text, next Monday, I'm going to be talking about the Masoretic text in our Aramaic Hebrew workshop, and some of the problems that developed as a result of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and talk a little bit about the history of how the Hebrew Bible came about and the canonization of the Hebrew Bible. But in Christianity, the Masoretic text is practically worship. We Western Christians, we love being technical. We love detail. We love mathematics. We're a mathematical, scientific society. Therefore, we're not comfortable with Hebrew as the original Hebrew was, which I'll talk about next Monday. We want it to be very precise and very technical, which Hebrew is not, and which the Masoretes, 700 years after the birth of Christ, did make Hebrew. They really tightened up the grammar, they added vowels, and there's many rabbis who don't go along with the Masoretic text. It's a nice source to use, but they don't place much stock in it, not like we Christians do. The Masoretic text pointed up this thing to read bed's head, the word head, as mitah. Well, the problem was, by just placing a hirik under the mem, you make it the word bed. And really, who says you're going to put a carrot under there? Why not something else? Because initially the word does mean a staff, but a very special type of staff. Almost like a scepter, but it's not really a scepter either. A staff was also used for identification, to identify the various tribes of Israel. They had very ornamental staffs, and the patriarch of each tribe had such a staff. Well, the patriarch over all Israel at this time that Jacob lived was Jacob himself. He was the patriarch, the eldest among all the Hebrews. And when he held up his staff, he was recognized as the eldest, the most respected, the most honored, and a man who declared their identity. And therefore, to worship on top of his staff was to worship and to declare, I am God's chosen. We are God's chosen people. And that staff represented that. And when he blessed Manasseh and Ephraim, the sons of Joseph, these were not pure Hebrew. The sons of Joseph were Hyksos, and of his Hyksos origin, he married a Hyksos wife, and so he worshipped on top of his staff. When he blessed those children, Ephraim and Manasseh, he declared, you are not part Hyksos anymore. You are total Hebrew. You are 100% Hebrew. There's a great lesson in that, because this was 200 years before slavery came on the Hebrews. Before the Hebrews went into sort of a captivity, into slavery in Egypt. Prior to that, Joseph was honored. This was a time if we study ancient Egyptian, there was a time when the sea people, or the Hyksos, came into Egypt, to settle in Egypt, fleeing from a famine around Greece and Italy. But they became so numerous that they soon just overthrew the Egyptian government. And the Pharaoh became not an Egyptian, but a foreigner, a Hyksos. So, and here, this was about the same time that Joseph appeared on the scene, which is why he was accepted by the Pharaoh. An Egyptian Pharaoh would have never accepted a Hebrew, would never accepted a foreigner to hold a political office. But a foreigner who was, the Pharaoh himself, he welcomed a foreigner. He welcomed putting Joseph as a leader, prime minister of Egypt. And they were honored and held an elite position for 200 years, over 200 years. Very close to the existence of the United States, over 200 years. But then the Egyptians rose to power again, overthrew the Hyksos Pharaoh, and there arose a new Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. And he was so afraid of another revolution that he really clamped down on the Hyksos and the Hebrews. The Hebrews had settled in the land of Goshen, the most beautiful, fertile area along the Mediterranean Sea. They lived a wonderful life for 200 years, and almost overnight it changed. Almost overnight they went into slavery. I follow a pattern in the Bible, various patterns, which I write about in the book, which I may not send to my publisher. But I point out the similar patterns in the United States that follow the Hebrew people before they go into captivity, before they went into slavery, before they went into the Babylonian captivity, the Assyrian captivity. And I see that same pattern happening. And if that pattern continues, the Bible clearly explains what's going to happen. And one thing that's really going to happen is Christians are going to come under a strong persecution. Maybe not so much a life-threatening persecution, except for isolated instances. They may get beaten up, but that'd probably be the worst. There won't be the outright persecution you see in China or you saw in the old Soviet Union, but there will be a strong persecution, a censorship of Christianity, a censorship, strong, Christians losing jobs, losing businesses, ministries being shut down, forced to being shut down, being censored, lies being spread. They have laws in place now that strong punishments, consequences for hate speech, and forces against Christianity are rising, turning much of what Christians are teaching into hate speech, making good evil, and using that to shut down ministries, to boycott ministries. And it's going to come a time when churches are going to be tempted to compromise. This is far worse than just any physical type persecution, is using fear, threats, not fear of your life so much to the fear of losing your livelihood, the fear of being humiliated, the fear of scandals, the fear of lies being spread about you, so that you begin to compromise. You begin to, it's not so bad to go along with what they want. We'll tone down. We'll take the crosses off our churches because that's offensive to people. We won't carry our Bibles because that's offensive to people. And we'll tone down our evangelism. We won't be so aggressive in our evangelism anymore because we don't want to offend. What we really don't want is for these people who are literally like terrorists, who threaten us, who threaten our livelihood, who threaten to censor us, who even threaten us with physical violence, we cower down. And we start losing our identity as the Hebrews began to lose their identity after 200 years of slavery. They began to gradually assimilate into the Egyptian cult, the Egyptian religions. In fact, that's why the lamb was used, sacrificed, and the blood placed on the doorpost, was because they worshipped the sheep god, a major god in Egypt at that time. And God literally told the Hebrews, declare your identity. Forsake these Egyptian gods, destroy their gods, kill the lamb and put the blood on the doorpost, and declare to everybody, you are not following, you are not compromising your faith. If you do that, you'll be protected when the plagues come. We are going to be called to declare our identity. And there may be consequences to declare our identity. And we're in a strong temptation to compromise. Are we going to do it? Are we going to? It's going to be so subtle, so simple. So what's wrong with taking down our crosses? What good is that anyways? What's so wrong with declaring that man is a sinner? That there's a hell out there, and that people need to be saved. So maybe we don't have to tone it down. We can do our evangelism another way. And these are the churches that are going to be the first to fall. The ones who will stand strong, though, because after that, there's going to come a time of plagues. And when the plagues come, if you take your stand for God, He'll pass over you. Now, it's just a thought. Maybe I'll publish it, maybe I won't. I could be wrong. Maybe taking that strong stand for God might create a Nineveh that repented and escaped the coming judgment. We can either see a great revival, or we can see a real test of our faith. Either way, it's going to be a test of our faith. A test of our faith to bring revival. A test of our faith to stand against the consequences of believers who cower in the corner and won't declare their identity. It's going to be up to us as Christians. The fate of this nation doesn't lie in who's elected president. It's not going to matter who the president is. You know, you get your favorite candidate. Don't trust in the arm of the flesh. And so many Christians are. So many Christians are so frightened that their candidate's not going to win. It's not going to matter. It's not going to make one bit of difference. God is going, He is looking to the believer and the stand that the believer makes. Not who gets to be elected president, but where the believers stand in their relationship with God. And it doesn't matter who's elected. God is still looking to the believers. We are the ones who are going to determine the fate of this country. It's our faith in God, it's our stand for God, and it's our prayers that's going to spare this country, not who gets elected president. We need, the enemy, I believe, is trying to steer us away from our real focus. God is the one who puts in. I'm not saying don't vote. What I'm saying is, vote your faith. Vote, just vote. That's one way of taking your stand as a believer. As a believer, I'm voting for this particular candidate because it follows my principles of my faith, a way of taking a stand. But don't expect whoever is elected to protect you. You can't depend on the arm of the flesh. Only in God. He's the one who's with you 24/7. Never leaves your side. And if whatever you do as unto Him. When the time of plagues come, pass over.